Well, I'll tell you what, it's my lucky day. Anytime I'm talking to a friend, especially somebody like Stephanie Arnold, it's a blessed day for me. In this case, for the people that are watching this video, my Facebook friends, my YouTube channel followers, and people that just happen to fall into this hole, this black hole, the universe, my YouTube channel, I want to introduce you to somebody I think is well worth knowing, worth listening to, and somebody that will inspire you, and not just by what happened to her, but how she's handled it and the direction she's taken with her life, because she's obviously influencing people in different ways. She's been on talk shows, wall to wall across the country, on television and cable. If you go on Netflix or Amazon, you're going to find, videos, documentaries, things. She's in all kinds of anthologies on video stuff. And she has a wonderful book called 37 Seconds. It has a subtitle, which is, what is this, Stephanie?
Dying revealed heaven's help.
There you go. And we're dying to have you reveal what's going on. So we were talking earlier, and I said, you know, we're going to get to the part where you have a near death experience and you're dead, literally dead for 37, flatline. Not your imagination, but the real deal. But I kind of like to give people a little readout of who you were going into that, what you were up against when you were trying to express yourself with your what you think is going to happen, and then the event itself, and then we'll kind of go from there. So I'm going to turn you loose and enjoy and listen and absorb like everybody else. And Stephanie Arnold, it's yours.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's a pleasure being here. You of all people. We met a little while ago, and I really consider you a mentor and a friend, and I'm inspired by you daily and your history, your background, and what you've done in your life and turned around things. I use you as an example regularly with my family. So thank you. Thank you for coming into my life. And I wasn't going to start this off I'll tear you, but we will get through it. I'm telling my story is like, okay, let's just get through it and then go back to you. Who I was before this incident happened, I was a TV producer. I had worked in the television industry since I was 14 years old and working in news. I worked my way up. I produced infomercials, commercials. I worked on music videos. I directed music videos. And then I worked on several reality shows and game shows. At one point, I was an executive in charge of a division of the of Endemol, which was the largest independent production company in the world, and doing shows like Deal or No Deal, Extreme Makeover Home Edition, those shows. And so I had money, I had success, I had this incredible life, but I didn't have the love of my life, and I had no one to share it with. So I spent time in China, and I spent time with some Mayan priests in Mexico and in shamans, and I was curious about. I'm Jewish. My faith is Jewish, but I have a love of other cultures, traditions, and when I started to learn about energy healing with this cranial sacral therapist, I was like, what is that? Because I'm actually feeling something in my body and you're not physically touching me. And this cranial sacral therapist was like, if you're interested in it, my teacher is in China and you should go see him. So I did. I went to Wudang Mountain, which is the founding mountain of Kung Fu. It was where Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon was filmed. And I was on a mission to connect this kind of, I think I've always been on this mission to do this kind of soul-filled, having this soul-filled need. There was something pulling me, but at the same time, I was quite heavily immersed in the world of my world of TV, which is you're only as good as your latest hit. It's high stress, it is high pressure, but I thrived in it. I loved it. But I was looking for something I'm like, maybe being in that and also having this kind of spiritual need for fulfillment was counterproductive. So I go to China. You climb 8,000 steps every day, and you go to this golden temple, and I'm meditating, I'm doing qigong, I'm learning all about this, and I'm just, I'm acutely aware that I'm slightly disconnected, and I'm like, well, if I am not able to give 100% of myself to somebody, then how can I expect somebody to come in and give me the unconditional love that I would like? And I went in a 100-day retreat. No drinking, no sex, no partying, no, the only thing I did was I worked and I came home and I meditated.
How,
And
how,
during that
what
yeah,
time of your life was this?
it
How,
was my mid-30s.
okay.
So at that point I was running this division. Life was just moving at the speed of light. And so I meditated and I was like, where is this person? And I think 2 months after I finished my 100-day retreat, because one thing that happens when you quiet things down, as you know, you can hear things differently. Um, and I felt things differently. And 2 months after this retreat was over, I met the love of my life and married him 6 months later. So I was living in LA, and Jonathan I met through a matchmaker, and he relocated me to Chicago, this great city that is freezing cold. And that pretty much was the end of my career, because Oprah had, you know, ended her show. There was not really much for me to do as a TV producer here. So the one thing we started to do was produce a family. And, he had a child from a previous relationship. That was fine. And then we tried, after 3 rounds of IVF, I had Adina, so our first, and there were no complications, no issues. She was born 41 weeks later. The only issue I had was that she was so big that I ended up, after 14 hours of labor, having a C-section. But I was functioning. I came back. I was starting to work back in TV, pitching shows. Like, I went right back into things. And then I also took my experience from IVF, which is very, very difficult, and started incorporating it into education, especially for women who were struggling to talk about it. And most people don't like to talk about it. It's like this dirty little secret somehow, where they're like, oh, I can't actually get pregnant. And I'm like, why is this a secret? So let me start talking about it. And became an advocate for an IVF clinic in that respect. And then my husband, who is was a former Air Force pilot, and he was the chief economist for the New York Attorney General's office, and he was also a PhD economist from the University of Chicago. So really smart, statistically driven, data driven. He was offered an opportunity in New York to be the chief economist for New York State, for the New York Attorney General's. So we were splitting our time between New York and Chicago, and I got pregnant with Jacob. That was after round 7 of IVF. And then everything went swimmingly until the 20-week ultrasound. And at the 20-week ultrasound, they talk about the heart, the spine, the fingers, toes, like it's a full body scan. And at that moment, they said, everything's fine except you have placenta previa. And in that moment, something sat wrong with me. And for those of you who don't know, placenta previa, it's where the placenta is growing on top of the cervix. And I'll get into a little bit more of that. So it can block the way the baby can come out. So I go to Jonathan, I said, I don't know what, I don't know what this is, but I've got a bad feeling about it. So of course he says, honey, you're getting great prenatal care. You haven't had a problem before. There's no issues with pregnancy, so right, no issues having baby. And I said, yeah, I just, look, my blood type is O negative, which is 7% of this population. It's a very rare blood type. I said, I don't want to be special in any category. There's something ominous. There's something that feels off. So what does one do when you feel, stressed about it? You go home and you Google it. And so I'm Dr. Google about, like, this is placenta previa. It's a 1 in 200 risk. It's very common. What can happen with a placenta previa? It could turn into an accreta, which is basically where the placenta merges itself with the uterus. If that happens, then you could bleed. If that happens, you could hemorrhage, you might need a hysterectomy. And the bottom line is the worst case scenario is you and the baby could die. And I sat back and, you know, you and I have talked about this. It was a knowing. It was, I know this is going to happen. The only difference is the baby's going to be fine, but I'm going to be dead on the operating table. And I was so sure of it that if I didn't know myself and I didn't know the next part, I would think the person was out of their freaking mind. Like completely like you are so, why are you being so negative? Right? Like, why would you think this? But when I sat back with it, it was like, you know, when something, I mean, you know, but your audience, when you know, when the hair on the back of your neck stands up, or you just know when you shake somebody's hand that you're like, this is a bad dude. I don't know why. I just have a really, really horrible feeling about this. That was the feeling. And so I am not one to be quiet, even if people are ignoring me. And maybe that's the benefit of, you know, in my past, be the benefit of being a producer, and you like have to make your voice known in order to get stuff done. But I told everyone, I told nurses, I told doctors, I'm like, my placenta previa is going to turn into an accreta. I'm going to bleed. I'm O negative. You need extra blood. I'm going to need a hysterectomy, and baby's going to be fine, but I'm going to be dead on the operating table. And I said that to every single person. Of course, in their defense, you know, all of my tests were negative. So there was no accreta. The ultrasounds were showing there was no problem with the amniotic fluid, the baby. There were no issues. The only issue was my brain. And so Jonathan kept thinking, you know, well, maybe it's too much testosterone in your body. You're having a boy. You've never had a boy before, you know, maybe. And then in the end, he was thinking, well, maybe there's something wrong with the baby that they can't determine. So I'm just going to think that, you know, everything is going to be fine. So all of that's fine, except at some point, like I was having visions of, you know, I'd be walking my daughter in the stroller. It was dead winter and the fountain was off. But then in my mind's eye, the fountain would start, you know, I was explaining how the fountain is so beautiful when it's flowing. And in my mind's eye, that fountain turned to blood. And I had a visceral reaction to it. I felt my body hemorrhage. Like I was wearing leggings. It was winter. I couldn't see anything, but I grabbed hold of the stroller. I lost my balance and I'm like, I'm bleeding out. So I called my husband. I said, you need to meet me in the ER. The ER. And so I go, I get triaged. They're like, Mrs. Arnold, are you okay? I'm like, no, obviously I'm bleeding. And so they're like, no, you're fine. Everything's fine. Baby's fine. You know, you're perfectly fine. And so Jonathan's like, okay, it's false alarm. And I'm like, no, this is a warning. And then it went from so in the early stages of pregnancy, you see your doctor once a month, then it goes to like once, you know, I don't know, every couple of weeks. I don't remember. It's kind of like, I think with pregnancy, you just block everything out. But then it goes to once a week. And each week the doctor would be like, are you still having the visions? I said, yes. And so they're like, why don't you have a consult with anesthesia? And I'm like, okay. So I have a consult with anesthesia. I tell her what my fears are. And she's like, you know, Miss Arnold, we're, you know, a teaching hospital. We do emergency drills all the time. We're prepared, you know, for a worst case scenario. I hope that helped you. And I said, it is what it is. At one point, you know, I was so scared that I called a friend of a friend and he said, you know, I said, help me out. What happens in the event that I need a hysterectomy during the delivery? Stephanie, you're not going to need that. I said, can you just entertain me? It's like, well, your OB wouldn't be able to do it, but they transfer you to maternal fetal medicine. But you really don't want maternal fetal medicine to do. You'd rather have a gynecological oncologist do it because they have more experience with high risk reproductive organs. So I was like, okay, so I made a call. And at this point we were grounded in Chicago because I started to bleed a little bit. So they didn't want any more issues. So I called the head of gyn-onc at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, again, teaching hospital, delivers 12,000 babies a year. I'm like, I need an appointment with the gyn-onc. And they're like, why? And I explain, and they're like, are you okay? There's nothing in your file that shows this. I'm like, can you please just make the appointment? Eventually I got the appointment. I'm sitting in the waiting room and my husband is there with me. And, you know, he's like, we're seeing all these women suffering from cancer. They all have IVs in their arm. They have no hair. They're struggling. And here I am, a healthy pregnant woman, 7 months pregnant, 7.5 months pregnant. And he's like, I'm embarrassed to be here. I said, I don't know what to tell you. Everybody's telling me, all they see is an open road, and I see an 18-wheeler headed straight for me. Maybe this doctor will have heard of something. Maybe there's some sort of tumor. Maybe there's something happening that no one's picking up, and say, oh, I had a patient like this that had these premonitions during their pregnancy, and this is what this is. So go in, meet with the head of gynonc, and there's resident. She's taking notes, and the doctor, he says, yeah, how can I help you? And I said, well, I'm going to have a placenta accreta, and I'm going to need you to be there the day I deliver my baby so that you can give me a hysterectomy. And he stops and he's like, Mrs. Arnold, have you been on the internet? And I said, well, yes, I have, doctor, but this is going to happen. And so he says, okay, well, why don't we do an MRI and see if it's positive for an accreta? If it is, I will schedule myself the day of your appointment, of your induction or whatever it is. So I said, okay. And I felt better because I had something else to do. And I felt that the doctor was taking me seriously, which she was. So I do the MRI. The MRI is negative, and my husband says, you should feel better. And I said, I feel worse because I'm running out of people to tell this crazy story to. So then what do we all do when we feel like we're not being heard? We go to social media and post, hey, I'm going to need blood, I'm going to give birth in a month and whatever. So of course, my friends, people that are close to me, are you okay? But it wasn't that I thought anyone could donate their blood. It was more of maybe they would have heard somebody had this kind of foreboding with their own pregnancy and then give me some insight as to what to look up, because I was at a loss. Anyway, so the day comes, Jonathan is in New York for a meeting, and then I start bleeding on the kitchen floor. And I said, oh, it's time to deliver this baby. So my nanny was there, my daughter's there, and she's 2 at the time. My stepdaughter wasn't living with us at the time. And, we get in the car, my nanny sits in the driver's seat, and then she says, and I said to her, get out. And she's like, what do you mean you can't drive? You're bleeding. I said, I had lots of premonitions. Dying in a car accident was not one of them. Get out, and I'm like, let's go. So we get there, I get triaged. The anesthesiologist apparently that I had spoken to before, on a consult, she came in and she introduced herself. I don't remember that at all. I was Skype chatting with my husband. This was in 2013. So Skype chatting. And he's like, I explained to him, you've made me the happiest woman in the world. Please take care of these children. This is not anyone's fault, and I'm just going on like this, because I'm convinced that these are the last words he's ever going to read. And he's still not getting it. And he is like, where do I meet you? And I said, 8th floor recovery, hopefully. And I closed that. I hugged my daughter a million times. And as they wheel the gurney out to take Jacob, I break down crying. And I said to my doctor, I said, there's something wrong. You need to put me under general anesthesia. She's like, Stephanie, if I put you under general anesthesia, I put the baby to sleep. I know you've been stressed this whole pregnancy. Let's go ahead and get him out. Everything's quiet right now. You are in good hands. I will be your husband in this respect. And here I am being wheeled into the operating room that's going to give life to my son. And I know it's going to take mine. So if anyone has given birth in your eyes or has been there to witness it, especially with a C-section, you have a curtain in front of your face, your arms are in a T, you have IVs in your arm. I had an epidural. There's no escaping this. So the fear was so palpable that I like to say, and I don't know if this is what actually happened, but I like to say that I scared myself out of my body, because from the moment they started with the scalpel to take Jacob out, I don't remember any of it. And so they take Jacob out, and as soon as he comes out, they deliver the placenta, and seconds later, I'm dead.
Okay, do you remember dying, or it just blacked out at that point, or?
Blacked out before it happened. Apparently they told me that, there were things that were done, everything was going swimmingly. Everything was fine. I didn't remember it until we ended up doing the regression therapy later, which we can talk about. So they deliver him. I ended up having a very rare pregnancy complication called amniotic fluid embolism. It's a 1 in 40,000 risk where amniotic cells get into the mother's bloodstream. And if you happen to be allergic to it, your body goes into somewhat of an anaphylactic shock. And in most cases, you don't make it. To give you perspective, at the time of my AFE, my amniotic fluid embolism, there have only been 10 in the history of this hospital. The hospital had been in existence for 30 years, 12,000 babies a year. 10, 6 did not make it, and the other 3 are in permanent vegetative states. So the first part of it is you go into cardiac arrest and you flatline. And at that point, there's crash cart, there's whatever it is to get me back up. They resuscitate me in 37 seconds. They intubate me and tape my eyes shut. And then the second phase happens, which is called DIC, which is what anesthesiologists have named the acronym. It's basically where your body can't clot blood. And they've nicknamed it death is coming. So it's worst case scenario. But there was something in the OR that I did not predict. There was a crash cart and there was extra blood. And I needed both to save my life. What's interesting is that the anesthesiologist that I had to consult with said she said she was uncomfortable that I spoke so clearly about what was going to happen, had a baby before, had a C-section before. So this wasn't the fear of the unknown, and had sought out specialists to save my life. And with that one phone call, she flagged my file incorporating the extra blood and crash cart. And that's why I'm alive today. So,
really.
yeah, go ahead.
It was a major intervention. Had you not said something, would have had a different outcome.
And keep saying things, people come up to me like, after the 10th doctor or nurse said, there's nothing to worry about. You're stressed out. You're histrionic. You're neurotic. You're a pregnant woman. You're hormonal. I would have shut up. I said, then you would have stayed dead. I mean, it's not worth staying quiet if it's going to save your life, especially when those feelings are so strong. What's the worst that could happen? I'm wrong. Okay, I'm wrong. I'll give it to you. I was crazy, neurotic. I was hormonal. Here's some flowers. I will never have a baby again. Thank you. Sorry for stressing everybody out, including myself and my family. But what if you're right? What if you're right? So I go, they stabilize me. Jonathan texts the doctor, says, how's everything going? And the doctor says, Jacob's fine, Stephanie's stable. And he's smart enough to know that's not good. So he gets to the hospital. They put him in a consultation room with anesthesiologist. And he always said it, and you can relate to this with your experience as well. They said the anesthesiologists think a lot like pilots, and you're just not emotional about it. You're just like, what do I need to get to the next phase? And they appreciated with this crazy, painful story that he was just very straightforward. Give me worst case scenario. What are we gauging? What do we need to know? And they said, do yourself a favor. Don't look up what an amniotic fluid embolism is, because it's a widower's site. It's like one after the other. So he finally sees the baby and he goes to spend time with the baby. And then it's a 15-minute walk from the nursery to the ICU and the other hospital and the end of hospital. And he comes in and he sees me in a medically induced coma. There's machines keeping me alive. And he's sitting there listening to them breathe for me. And about 7 hours later, they realized that, he said to the anesthesiologist before, he said, if she needs a hysterectomy, this is the doctor we met with a couple months ago. And she thought that was odd, but she took note of it. And then 7 hours later, the bells and whistles go off, and it turned out that I was still hemorrhaging. And they called in that doctor, the gynec, to perform the hysterectomy. When they did the pathology on the uterus, they showed that an accreta had started to form, but where the MRI was, at the stage of where it was undetectable. So everything came true.
What was happening in your body? Having been through surgeries myself, I'm assuming that you're retaining fluids and you're bloating up and looking awful for your husband when he walks in. That's what
Yeah, so when you do a hysterectomy on someone who's just given birth, the uterus hasn't had time to contract. So your belly still looks. I went in at 173 pounds. I left the hospital at 220. Like my kidneys had failed. I had a heart attack, my lungs collapsed. Like I had 60 units of blood and blood product transfused into me. I was in inpatient dialysis for a while. And then when I left the hospital, I was an outpatient in a wheelchair. But so I was in a coma, a medically induced coma for six days. And in the Jewish faith, on the 8th day, you do a circumcision. So it's called a bris. And my husband's sitting there saying, how can we have the bris? The boy will be 8 days. We'll do it later. And the rabbi is like, no, as long as the baby is healthy, you have to have the bris. And so he's like, but I want my wife to be there. What do I do? And he's like, you pray. And Jonathan is not he was that much of a prayer. I'd say he's a hopeful agnostic, if you will. I think, after going through all of this, he would say he's leaning more towards a believer, as you can see in that Netflix documentary. But before, I'd say his religion is more about love. His religion is about, like, I found the love of my life. I have faith in us. It can't hurt to thank God for these things, but to witness a miracle or to pray for one, I think is uncomfortable or was uncomfortable. But everybody in that hospital that had touched me, on me, in me, around me, were praying. Didn't make a difference what denomination they were, what religion, what faith, any of it. And on the 6th or 7th day, they extubate you to see where your brain is, because they can't tell how much damage there was. There's no guarantee. And I sat up. I didn't sit up. I looked down at my swollen belly because I'm severely edemic. And I'm the very first thing. Can I curse on this podcast?
a little bit.
You know what? When I wrote the book, the editor is the editor from Christianity Today. And I wrote a couple of curse words, and Jonathan says, you cannot curse in this book. This book is going to be in the Library of Congress. And I said, well, let me ask my editor. And the editor is like, well, did you actually say that? I said, that's exactly what I said. He's like, then you can say that. So I'm going to say it here for the reason, because it's so poignant, because in that moment, they tell you that the way you go into anesthesia is the way you come out of it many times. So mind you, I feel like I was stopped, paused in a blip, and coming out the other side of it, I'm like, am I still fucking pregnant? Like that was my response. And then Jonathan's like, he's like, she knows where she is. She's cursing. I think she's going to be fine, and so it definitely took a while. I mean, I was in the hospital about a month. Baby is fine. When all of these different departments do their rounds, they were like, how did you know? And I said, you tell me. I'm in a teaching hospital. Teach me. Like, how did I know? They're like, well, foreboding exists prior to a heart attack or an embolus, but 3 months before, in the detail you've had it, I think you need to go spiritual on this one. So the healing physically took a good 6 months. I think that I had to learn how to read again. I was in a wheelchair. I came home, the children were traumatized. I mean, a little list of ones, but through this process, I got physically a little stronger, but I felt like a whole of a person. And so I went to different therapies. A friend of mine recommended I go see a regression therapist, and that uses hypnotherapy to take you back into the moments of trauma. I wasn't too optimistic about it. I think, I had done a couple of talk shows, and I was on the Steve Harvey show, and, here it is, me advocating again. So with IVF, I advocated, then this happened, and I'm like, people need to talk about their intuition, and, they feel things, and this can save lives. And so immediately I went into the producer mode, and I'm like, which is great because it puts a distance between me and my story. Except the problem was I was the story. So it got a little too close to the flame. And at one point, Steve said, did you see the light? And I said, I don't know, man, they gave me a lot of drugs, and I kind of just, blew it off. But at the same time, I was like, maybe there's some answers into this if I can find it. And there was nothing traditional about our story. So like, why do I need traditional therapy? And I wasn't afraid to say we've got one life to live and this is it, or, there's something more, but I wanted to experience it myself before I can speak it. And I videotaped my therapy, and you see a split screen of me going through one of the worst moments, which is she finally got me back into the OR. And I explain everything from who hit the button for the code. It was complete out of body experience. Which nurse jumped on my chest to give me CPR, that my doctor was at the end, by my feet. The anesthesiologist was by my feet. That there wasn't just one crash cart, that there were two crash carts. What my daughter was doing at the other end of the hall in the labor and delivery room, what my husband was wearing when he got off the plane. Like, there were just all these little things. It's just, how I explained it was like the roof of the hospital came off, and I was seeing all of this going on in the room. And I saw, and so how the regression works is like, you are an observer going into this. So there's three of me. So there was me as the observer going into, and you're accessing. What she says is that, it's like you have stored memories as film strips. And under this meditation, under this hypnosis, you can access these film strips. And then you can see things from an observer. It's not going to hurt you as much, but it's, you can see what's really happening. So, I access it. I'm the observer. Then I see my body on the gurney in the operating room. And then I see my spirit perpendicular to it. And I keep hearing, and I write about this, like this moment is so vivid and so powerful, of like hearing the heartbeat and the EKG monitor, and just keep it going, like as a countdown until this bomb was going to go off, and how, what I'm seeing all around me. So, I'm crying, but at the end of this session, I feel like a weight has been lifted. Like I feel unlocked. And so of course, Jonathan, I had him take a gander at it, but it's quite graphic. So he doesn't want to see me in pain. And so he's like, his University of Chicago head goes on. He's like, this isn't a great, an episode of Grey's Anatomy in your head. And I was like, I said, after I was done calling him a lot of names, I was like, you know what? You're absolutely right. People get confused all the time with memories, and then maybe something that they've seen on TV. So I called the therapist and I said, how do you know what I'm telling you is real? And because it wasn't just all the out of body. I saw spirits. I saw my grandmother. I saw a little boy. I saw Jonathan's father. I saw who had passed in 1998. So like there were all of these things happening at once, but it was jumbled. And so she says, sometimes the only validation we get is the patient feels better, and you feel better. And I said, that's not good enough. I have witnesses. So I took the tapes to the doctors who were present. And, as you can see on any of the talk shows where they're like, I didn't go to medical school for this. This is accurate down to where I was standing, what I was doing. They're like, you were clinically dead. So no pulse, no blood pressure, no heartbeat. So, it was just like, it was inconceivable. Your eyes were taped shut. There were things that you should not know. And it was quite accurate. And so that set me on this path to start writing the book and then sharing that. And I have shied away, and you and I will probably get into this, but you and I have had certain shared experiences, and I've had a hard time coming to terms with the fact that this is real, and I can't go back again and not say anything and see if the same thing would happen, right? I can't get that data to say, okay, if I didn't say anything, I'd still be alive. And I believe, and I was talking to the rabbi the other day, I said, I believe that I do believe in predetermination, but I also believe in free will. And Jonathan says, well, how can that be possible to believe in both? I said, I believe they're on two different paths. I said, my expiration date is my expiration date. How well I survived was due to my free will. So maybe I was always going to survive. How well I survived was due to my free will. And so, it's been a lifelong journey now since that's happened, to open myself up even further. Any interview that you see, I really gloss over the 37 seconds because I feel it. And so I'm like not ready to go, or I haven't in a long time. Well, not a long, I haven't really been able to go deeply into that space because it's like, oh, I'm reliving that. And my spiritual path has just been like kind of in and out, because I'm like, is this real? Is that you go through all of it? But I'll let you ask questions, because I can talk for hours with you about it, or I can talk and just listen.
Well, both of us could talk for hours. That's either a good trait or not.
Yeah, I don't know.
But I recall you were doing an interview in a library, or not library, at a bookstore, and somebody asked you about something, and you were talking about a car accident, that you were talking about the car being crunched or something before you actually got in the car and had the car. Why don't you relate to that a little bit? That's interesting. I think that's like an after effect, that you were trusting your feeling, knowing.
Yeah. So what's interesting is, like, people have asked like how I've changed through the near death experience and everything. And I think, I've always been empathic, except when you go through something like this, it like eviscerates any kind of filter. So all of a sudden you have this straight fuel to whatever other people are sensing. And I've sensed people's heart attacks from 3,000 miles away. I've had from people unrelated to me. I've had, moments where I'm just like, this person is about to die, or my child is going to go missing. And there are things that happen, like if I react and I speak up, I diffuse it. And sometimes I'm like, this isn't real, and I don't speak up, and it happens. And I'm like, I will never do that again. Like, I will never not speak up. So that's for sure. I don't need this as a party trick. Every time I feel something, it's a matter of life and death. And you and I have a difference of opinion about karma and what have you, with kind of these visions, which we can get into. But I do think like when I get these, they're very strong, and I'm like, I'm getting this for a reason. Anyway, so what happened in I was on a book tour. I was with my cousin who collaborated on the book with me, and we get to the airport, and she has been deathly afraid. She constantly has dreams about the fact that she's going to die in a white car crash. So she's avoided always buying white cars. Whenever she sees, some, like she's about to get into somebody's car, she's constantly praying. She's thinking like, oh my God, is this going to be the time? But she's always the one that's supposed to be driving. So she has never bought a white car. And we get to the car rental, and the only car they have is a white car. And I said, well, what about your dream? She's like, well, it was an SUV, so I don't, it's going to be fine. And so I'm like, okay. So we go do the book tour, come back, she's dropping me off at the airport, and this big truck T-bones her. But it was a moment right before this happened. And it was one of those little smart cars. There's a moment right before it happens where I felt arms kind of holding back. And I felt it around her too, but I felt it. And the airbags did not deploy. And here she is in shock, because she's like, the vision has come true. It's been years, but the vision came true. And I said, you're okay, you're okay, you're okay, you're okay. And she's like, yeah. And she's in shock. I said, get out. And so we get out of the car, and she said, but the airbags didn't deploy. I said, if the airbags deployed, we would have been severely hurt. Like, it was so close, how these little cars are. Then I said, I said, now it's never going to happen again. Like, it's gone. Like, whatever that was is gone. And then I think next year, she bought a white SUV. She was just like, there was no attachment to it anymore.
So yeah, we've had discussions before, because you and I both have a knowing sense. And I mean, I I used mine in Vietnam and faced court martials and going to jail. So I mean, it's really
Yeah.
a whole different thing when you tell a general or a major or something versus just telling your husband. But it's the same chemistry at work. But I've come to the point in time where it's wisdom has to come in there because I used to be at your age. If I knew, I said.
Right.
Now, as I gotten older, I'm going, if it's my child or grandchild, different story. What, you know,
Yeah.
but I don't interfere so much. I kind of pull back a little bit because there is a time and a place. And so that's the hard thing because there's no way you can teach that, train somebody, or tell them that was right or wrong. It's you make a choice. So
Yeah.
I'm at that stage of my life now where wisdom is the front runner. It's like, dude, the people really need to know this. So I because you're interfering with their karma, their free will, a lot of stuff. So that's another whole discussion there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what have you found now that you're at this point in your life? Obviously, you and your husband have had countless discussions or lack of discussions because you're tired of them. Um, because I got a feeling now when you feel something, there's nope, that's it, let's do it. Um, how's that working out for you? Because uh, I know my circumstances at home. My wife, well, she asked me why I'm doing something. I say I just know this way. She ends up. That's the end of the argument. She walks away. I don't know
Right.
how you handle it at your house.
It's happened enough times where he's like, you know what? Um, let's just go with your gut. But don't take advantage of it. So I'm like, I really need this piece of jewelry, but but no, I mean, he's gotten to the point where he's like, he doesn't pretend that he understands it. He just knows that I'm able to feel things. And so he knows it's at his best interest to listen differently, even if he's off kilter from it or he has to change plans because of it. So I mean, they can be little things of like, I feel like a drug deal's, well, it's a big deal. I feel like a drug deal's going down in the park and we have to walk through this park. I'm like, I let him know, let's be alert, nothing happens. Okay, great, no harm, no foul. But if I don't say anything and it happens, then I'm angry at myself for not saying it. And I think we can all, especially in today's climate, just be more aware and take our own feelings seriously. I think people look at intuition that in some cases it's hardwired, in some cases spiritual. I don't really care what you believe. I just know that it's real. So I might never understand the mechanics of how this works, but each time I feel something and I say it, for me, it diffuses that energy and maybe nothing happens. Fantastic. So great. So
So
yeah, he's listening more.
all right, so this experience you had, obviously people go, oh, it's changed your life. I got a feeling your life was already kind of changing, and this was just a part of the flow. But that's me knowing you, and I'm just going, because some people have something like this, and it's like, whoa, I believe in God now. I don't see a radical shift. I see more of an opening about relationships and love and questions, but I don't see
Yeah.
you were already shifting in my
Yeah.
judgment.
Yeah. It's, I, being as career minded as I was, and then to find the love of my life, and then to understand after having him and my family for such a short time, and then losing my life and coming back from it. It's been a hard landing. It has not been easy. But I'd say now you're correct. I mean, you posted the other day of my bodybuilding stuff. I take ownership of my stuff almost always. But you get to a point where you're tired of hearing yourself complain, or you're tired of hearing yourself whine about the same thing. And look, everybody's got trauma, everybody's got issues, everybody's got their pain points. Some are higher than others. You've been through, I don't know, 3,000 surgeries and you look like you're 14 years old. So there's something that's is really incredible about your reincarnation every single time. But Most people are not like that. And so when you know, when you fester in this anger about post near death and just like, no one was listening to me, my husband wasn't protecting me, what you go through this whole thing, and then you have these scars on your body, your womanhood was taken away from you, you feel gross, like all these things. I was like, you know what? I am tired of hearing the noise. So I can choose the same way that I did with IVF or the same way that I did with intuition. Like I can choose to complain about it and I get nowhere. And I just feel, I get to listen to myself feel the trauma every day. And people be like, you're absolutely right. You could complain about all the surgeries. You could complain about all of the past and everything. You could, but what good is it doing our psyche and our soul? So, I took matters into my own hands. I never expected it to be the way that it turned out. I ended up doing a bodybuilding competition. I felt very strong inside. I am not an athlete. I'm 51 years old. I am not somebody who really lifted weights. And to have my body transform from something edemic and 220 pounds into on stage in a glittery bikini with stripper heels on and walk on a stage able to walk and breathe, where many of the people that had what I had are no longer alive. It was really uplifting and empowering, not for myself, but my family. And so, we try and lead by example from all of this crap that we have to go through, like you do every day.
Amen to that. All right, I'm going to let you leave with a couple of words here. Not going to escape because we're talking about the future. We're talking about what's coming. You're as young as, in fact, you're probably a little bit younger than my own children. Uh,
It's it's relative, right?
yeah, I was that age once. I never have really grown up inside, but the next decade or two, you're going to see this child that you gave birth to and almost died. Uh, Graduate high school, move on, go to college, do his thing. What's that look like to you? What's the next decade or so look like to you? What do you where do you think it'll go? Where do you want it to go? Or are you just enjoying the ride?
I'm really enjoying the love I have, that I'm able to grow and learn from myself and learn from him and learn from my children. My daughter's bat mitzvah, Adina's bat mitzvah is in December, her actual birthday. And when you have a bat mitzvah, you have a Torah portion that's random, but it's based on the date. And this specific date that of her Torah portion is about Rachel and how Rachel died in childbirth.
Wow.
And I was like, how does that happen? So the messages and the symbolism is not missed. I see things differently. The glasses have been removed. The curtain has been pulled back on Oz. Like I lean into more when I feel something, like if I feel or sense a presence, I feel it, I acknowledge it, and then I move on, but I'm not hiding from it like I used to. I look forward to the day, my son and my husband hates when I say this, but I look forward to the day that my son falls in love and is going to get married or wants to get married. And I can use the best Jewish guilt line ever, Catholic guilt, whatever. I could be like, but would she die for you?
I love it.
He was like, you could not say that. So I was like, yeah, I mean, I look at this child and watch him play piano. And we were, and just look at how compassionate he is, and science driven, but also empathic, and how these children are just these lights that I really am looking forward to seeing what comes next. I want to get out of adolescence. I want to get out of puberty. I want to get out of menopause. But once all that happens,
so and professionally, you got podcasts you're working on, trying to develop some
for years. Yeah. I have the podcast. I have a producer that's optioned the rights for the movie. I've written the screenplay several times. We're trying to nail down uh, the right fluid for it, because I think the story, I don't have the ability to write the story bigger, because I think the messages can be bigger. And I'm in this little world. I just don't know how to do that. And then I don't know. I continue to do speaking events at hospitals and medical institutions. And I just spoke at a family office event, and I'm like, but they talk about finance and business and opportunities in cybersecurity and Russia and Ukraine. And why are you hiring me to come in and speak? And they're like, because I think the importance of intuition, these CEOs don't listen to it enough. And when you're talking about what matters most about this life and death, because we all will die and we all live this moment, and we're all, they are growing their businesses and whatever, but they're not paying attention to certain things. I think these are life lessons they need to understand a little bit more.
Well, thank you for joining me today and sharing this time with me, Stephanie. And
oh my gosh, always.
I will look forward. We will probably give it a talk someplace together, someplace,
Yeah.
or something somewhere. We will be doing something eventually down the road. But blessings and peace to you and your family, and to your husband, who I'm very empathetic for.
Yeah, you should. He's like, where, why aren't people feeling bad? The funny thing was, is like on the Netflix thing, he's, you know, as you saw on Surviving Death, he was like, he was looking at, you know, well, she was giving me all this information and he was processing it like an economist would. And can I tell you, thousands and thousands of hate mail, like email from to him. How can you stay with that bastard? He is horrible. He's cold-hearted. He's like this, and he's like, where's love? You know, it was like, you know, people are seeing it in 15 minutes, but they're seeing a reflection of themselves. If they're spiritual and their spouse is not, you know, how can they be heard differently? And so he will appreciate it, especially coming from you, since he has a huge amount of respect for you.
Tell him Happy Veterans Day this week, and blessings and peace to you. And we will chat later.
Thank you.